So if we look at some of these things that we can measure in the field, we often use these terms a bit interchangeably without completely understanding what they mean. When we talk about vaccine efficacy, we're looking at a specific reduction in a disease in correctly vaccinated individuals. So this can be established by a potency test or by field studies if you make sure in your field studies that all the animals have been correctly vaccinated and exclude those that haven't. But more commonly in the field, we do vaccine effectiveness studies where we are looking at the reduction in disease in real-world vaccinated individuals, and that takes account of the fact that some animals may not be correctly vaccinated. And then finally, we can talk about vaccination impact, which is the reduction in disease at population level following vaccination, taking account of wider coverage and herd effects. So vaccine effectiveness studies, which I think is what we're going to talk about for the rest of this webinar, there are a number of different study designs and they have their own strengths and weaknesses, and I will just briefly introduce the cohort study and the case control study, which are two of the most widely used. Giancarlo will say something about the ecological study or screening method. And the choice of which of these is appropriate will depend on a number of issues, including the epidemiology and the expected incidence, the availability of records, and the availability of resources. So if we look at the first one of these, which is the cohort study, the key to a cohort study is that it is a longitudinal study over time, and it's looking at a comparison between vaccinated and non-vaccinated groups of animals. And the idea is to compare the incidence of disease among the vaccinated and non-vaccinated individuals within the cohorts. So the point about these is that you can often do them, well, you can almost always do them prospectively. They can sometimes be done retrospectively, but only if you have very good records available. And these tend to be fairly large studies that are quite resource intensive, but can give you quite a lot of information about the population as a whole. In comparison, the case control study is a slightly simpler study, which is more of a cross-sectional snapshot study at a particular point in time, or an observational study. And again, we're looking at the difference in groups of animals that have and haven't had FMD, but here we're looking at the odds of vaccination in cases and the odds of vaccination in controls, cases being the ones that have FMD and controls being the ones that don't. And so we are going to compare the odds of vaccination amongst individuals who develop disease with individuals without disease. But for all of these studies, we have this problem of selecting controls. And it's very important that controls are selected so as to have an equal risk of exposure to foot-and-mouth disease as the cases. For example, as it says here, in the same village. And so in order to get meaningful results for these sorts of studies, you have to be very careful about the way that they're designed. And that's where I'm going to hand over to Giancarlo, who's going to say some more about that. But before I do that, I just point you towards one rather good review paper which I found when I was putting together these slides, which is a very nice review of case control vaccine effectiveness studies. This was published a couple of years ago in Vaccine, and as it's an open access paper, you should all be able to download it